switch them to silent mode so that we do not disturb the proceedings. Well, Excellency Ambassador, Madam Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of MEUSAC, the Malta EU Steering and Action Committee, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to welcome you all here. First and foremost, to welcome the Undersecretary of State in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland, with specific responsibility for parliamentary affairs, European policy and human rights. Well, the scenario within which we are going to listen to Her Excellency speak about the challenges and opportunities for the European Union as a global actor is a scenario which is a concrete scenario. In actual fact, currently, as we meet here in Brussels, the European Council, which brings together the 28 leaders, the prime ministers or presidents of the member states, with the president of the Commission and the High Representative and other senior EU officials, well, they are meeting in an environment which is characterized by uncertainty, particularly in relation to the Greek crisis, which we were hoping would have been resolved by yesterday, but in actual fact, we know that tomorrow the Eurogroup will be meeting once more to try and reach an agreement on how Greece is going to survive, or how the EU will survive in the face of such a situation, of course. Although I'm an optimist by nature, and I still hope for an agreement, but I'm also a realist, and I do understand that, and I can, of course, there is a life after whatever situation that will result from, as of tomorrow. Well, another uncertainty is certainly that created by the situation in the United Kingdom, with the renegotiations being requested by the United Kingdom by the Prime Minister David Cameron. In fact, this European Council yesterday specifically took stock of the situation in the United Kingdom. Quoting Donald Tusk, the President, your compatriot, Ambassador, Madam Secretary, and Madam Ambassador, and our friends from Poland. Well, following the first session of the Council, Tusk said this yesterday, and I quote, "Finally, the British Prime Minister set out his plans for an in-out referendum. So the talks on EU renegotiation will now get underway. It was the first step in a longer process that will also end at the European Council." I continue to quote, "As I said earlier today, one thing should be clear from the beginning: the fundamental values of the European Union are not for sale, and so are non-negotiable. We should consider British concerns, but only in a way which would be safe for all Europe. We will come back to this in December." And I close the quote. I feel that it is of paramount importance that the European Union does resolve the many internal issues that, in my view, do not allow it to be the global actor it should be. With a population of 500 million, representing 7% of the total world population, and boasting of a single market with 28 countries, making it a major world trading power, as well as an economy that, measured in terms of the goods and services it produces, having a GDP in 2014 of 14 million, is now bigger than that of the US, the United States of America, making it the world's leading economy. Yet the EU still does not exert an influence on the global stage worthy of what it represents. To discuss the challenges and opportunities of the EU as a global actor, we are honored to have with us today a very distinguished speaker. Polish Undersecretary of State has been in office. I will attempt to pronounce your surname. It is Moscicka-Dendys, yes. So, well, you were appointed as Undersecretary of State in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Poland, with responsibility for European policy, human rights and parliamentary affairs, on April 16, 2013. Prior to that, she served as Director of European Policy Department and Deputy Director of this department responsible for institutional affairs and Northern Europe. A graduate in law and classics at the University of Silesia in Katowice, she holds a PhD in international law from the University of Warsaw. She joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2002, and her previous postings include Copenhagen, where she got seconded to the office of the CBSS Commissioner for Democratic Development, and Berlin, where she served as First Secretary and later as Counselor at the Polish Embassy, covering EU policies including enlargement and institutional issues. She has also been a member of the board of the Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation since 2011. And in fact, she has just told me that she has to be in Warsaw tomorrow for a meeting that will take place in the morning. Well, a fluent speaker in German, English and Russian, and I now take the opportunity to invite you to deliver your speech and to enlighten us on such an important issue of great relevance for us, partners within the European Union.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a pleasure really to be here with you and be able to dwell a bit upon the Polish approach to the EU policies, on the EU's role globally as we see it from Warsaw perspective. And after this kind of presentation, I feel the burden on my shoulder to deliver something which would be convincing to you and give, let's say, comprehensive picture of Polish European policy and Polish involvement into the EU agenda. I was asked to talk about the European Union as a global actor in times of opportunities and times of challenges. So I'll try to be as brief as possible on that, but I would like to formulate my remarks in, let's say, three parts. In the first, describing the challenging environment, the global environment the Union is facing. In the second, dwelling on, in particular, the European neighborhood policy, which we regard as one of the crucial challenges in a short-term but also long-term perspective. And in my third part, I'll try to draw some conclusions out of these remarks I'll try to make. So let's start. The EU and the whole European community at this very moment are facing a considerable challenge arising from the globalization processes, but also a shift in the global balance of power and the demographic challenge. A challenge which sometimes is underrated, but which severely influences our stance in international policies. The newest report delivered by the European Commission General Secretariat of the Council, the EAS and the European Parliament, called the Global Trends to 2030, Can the EU Meet Challenges Ahead? Points out 5 global trends in the international environment, and I think they're worth looking at. First trend, the world population is aging, with the result that inequalities are starting to increase, in particular taking into account the inequality in the global growth of population, aging societies, this is in particular a phenomenon in Europe, irregular patterns of events, in particular migratory trends, emerging middle class, and the growing role of empowerment of women in many societies. The second pattern, or the second challenge, the political and economic pendulum is swinging towards Asia. This is obvious to say. I mean, a shift in balance of power in the global economy has to be taken into account. The new economic powers are going to emerge, in particular in Asia. And let's look at the numbers. By 2030, Asia will have outperformed North America and Europe jointly as far as the economic power, population, military expenditure, and investment are concerned. The Chinese economy will most probably become the biggest one globally, overtaking the United States. And the economic importance of European countries, Japan, and also Russia, is going to diminish within the next 20 years. Third trend, the technological and digital revolution, which is profoundly changing and influencing our societies. Technology will, as before, undergo fundamental transformation, but time elapsing from development of breakthrough technologies to their mass-scale launch onto the market will constantly be reduced. And digitalization and the internet are fundamentally changing the world we live in. And digital technology is the domain which will revolutionize our lives to the greatest extent. I think not even now we realize the scope of this digital revolution which is taking place and influencing the very life of each and every of us. Next trend, managing dwindling natural resources, which is becoming more and more challenging. Our development model, and one has to underline that, is strongly dependent on two very basic factors. The first one, climate change, and the second one, the scarcity of resources. Sustainable development that is capable of defending itself in terms of its environmental and social impacts is becoming an imperative for any economic activity, and this has to be taken into account. And the last trend, interdependence of states, which does not go hand in hand with an improvement of global governance. This probably is also a very important factor for the European Union and the very functioning of our integration model in Europe. And the report at the same time points out 5 challenges to the very European project, the 5 challenges the European Union is facing. Let's have a quick look on them. The first one, economic transformation. First of all, the authors of the report claim that a platform for sustainable economic growth, the mobilization of public and private investment, completion of the single market, better governance of the Eurozone, and establishing of an actual energy union are the most important challenges for the European Union in terms of economy on a short term. Another point, promoting a society of change and innovation, and here a clear focus on a digital revolution, European research and development space, and new approach to education are needed. Third aspect, fighting inequalities and social exclusion. I think in the post-crisis societies of the European Union, obvious to say, needless to say how important it is not to lose, in particular, the young generation, and shorten or diminish the gap between the winners and losers of globalization, of transformation processes, etc. And obviously a new stance on the migration debate, or one should maybe say migration/mobility debate. The fourth factor, improving the state of democracy, and here the complexity of decision-making processes is at core of the interest. The European Union is becoming less and less understandable for the European citizens, and I think this is something we all face, but no one has a recipe how to solve it quickly. We know that we have to improve the relationship between EU member states and European citizens. Subsidiarity, another very obvious motto under many activities of the European Union, still far away to be achieved to a certain extent, which would be satisfactory. And then a clear division of competences on all levels. I think we have to face it. We live in a multi-leveled, very complex governance system, and we need to tackle it in a way which would be acceptable for those participating in it. And the fifth factor, for me, a very important one, the international role of the European Union. If we want the European Union to survive and to compete with other global actors, we need to speak with one voice. And whether we wish or not, we need to be more coherent and find more synergies in terms of our performance in the international arena. There are many challenges in this very respect. It includes hot security discussions, reversal in military expenditure, trends, strengthening strategic partnership, including the US, but also engaging in an interaction with emerging powers, and here in particular with China. And the challenges, and this is my second point, the challenges the EU is facing concern not only its direct neighborhood, but probably the neighborhood is one of the crucial points to be tackled in the short-term perspective. It's both the situation in the south, North Africa, the Middle East, but also in the East. I mean, a context which for my own country, for Poland, is in particular of particular importance, taking into account the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the destabilization of Ukraine's East. The current international situation may influence the supply of energy resources, the migratory pressure, and to a certain extent have also the influence on domestic policies. We see that already, that because of, for example, here in Malta, you will see a direct linkage between the migratory pressure and the domestic context. The governments are being, it's in particular visible in Italy, for example, but also in Greece, where the migration pressure has a direct effect on the way the governments are handling policies or taking stands in international arena. And I think our main task for the future will be to aim for jointly finding solutions that would base actual economic and logistics capabilities of specific member states, and we have to bear in mind that our activities in the EU make sense only on condition that we conduct them in cooperation and in a coordinated manner, and in particular in the migratory context we need a closer cooperation with the countries of origin and countries of transit. An ability to control and manage borders by EU partners across the Mediterranean Sea, but also in the East, should be reinforced, and they should be supported by means of development aid too. Another item on the agenda, high on the agenda at the moment in the European Union, is the British problem, the question of Brexit, which impacts the political situation in the EU to a certain extent. And winning the elections to the House of Commons on the 7th of May by the Conservative Party of Mr. Cameron has accelerated the course of events in this area. Just yesterday and today, the European Council focused on the British problem, if you wish, and how to address it. The Conservatives brought in the question of a European referendum bill, and the referendum might take place as soon as spring next year, which is of particular importance for Malta, since you're preparing for your presidency, and then there might be a certain coincidence between the referendum and your preparations for the presidency. And an issue of fundamental importance for the Prime Minister Cameron is to succeed, especially image-wise, in limiting immigration that is perceived as excessive by the British society. Other points on the wishing list of the British of our British colleagues may be of tactical nature, but since they do not carry enough, let's say, political weight domestically to persuade the British society to vote for staying in the EU, questions like the famous ever closer union, the role of national parliaments, the relationship between the Eurozone and not Eurozone countries. As there is no acceptance of treaty changes at the moment among the member states, and there is not enough time to carry out such a scenario, what is to be expected is some kind of a political guarantee for Britain and possible primary law changes when time allows, but without undermining the very foundations of the European Union, to which, in particular in the opinion of my own country, the free movement of persons belongs. Germany's role, another very important aspect when taking into account the global role and the situation in the EU. Germany's role in the EU has already largely gone beyond the one that would result from its economic strength only. Germany is seeking for partners in European governance, as it's becoming more and more the crucial, the dominant even actor in the European Union. Germany's first impulse always directed towards Paris, this famous Franco-German alliance or axis. They call it Motor in Germany. There have been attempts to revive the German-French tandem, which is poorly functioning in economic matters these days, and differences in the state governance philosophy remain significant. The British, that could act as a kind of, I wouldn't like to use the word replacement, but a factor, let's say, another aspect, let's say, for the Germans from Berlin's perspective, are impaired by they being a non-Eurozone state and by the Brexit debate, which is obvious. Despite many aspects deriving from the free market approach and being a counterbalance for, let's say, the Southern Europe actions, this famous North-South axis is also something we should maybe tackle in the discussion. Poland, obviously, being the eastern neighbor of Germany, could play a role, but we are not yet there. Poland still is catching up. And we don't have the same parameters as France has. This should also be clearly said. So Berlin is predetermined to permanently seek for coalitions and partners, depending on the very subject of the discussion. This makes Germany's role in Europe even more complicated. And today, the discussion on the future of EU concentrates also on the new architecture of the Eurozone, and of the very economic and monetary union. I suppose you've seen the latest report. A report which started as a report of 3 presidents, then became a report of 4 presidents, and ended up as a report of 5 presidents. It was released just a few days ago, and it presents quite brave ideas for the next 10 years to come, with the ultimate goal of, let's say, strengthening the Eurozone, and it goes as far as proposing for a Eurozone current presidency and a Eurozone treasury by 2025. It's just a proposal, but it sets a certain trend and shows in which direction the very debate goes. For my own country, for Poland, we are pre-in when it comes to the Eurozone. We want to join, but we first of all need to meet the criteria, and for an economy as large as the Polish one, it's difficult to join at times of crisis, also because of the ERM solutions. This poses a certain challenge, because what we would like to avoid is creating further, let's say, hurdles or problems on our way to the Eurozone. So the Polish stance on the future of the Eurozone is going to be a philosophy of inclusiveness, something we've been advocating since the very crisis started. Which translates into implementing the EMU reforms in such a manner that would allow pre-in states like my own to join. And now a few sentences on Polish ideas on the EU's voice in foreign affairs. How do we see the foreign policy agenda of the European Union evolving from the Polish perspective? First of all, we think that Europe has to find or define its place in a dynamically changing modern world, taking into account that no European country is able to compete as single-handedly with the potential of the world's greatest powers like the US or China, or to contain aggressive Russian policy that in many aspects undermines the very foundations on which the post-war international order in Europe, but also globally, is led. Only unity, and this is very, very important for me. I mean, the word unity is probably crucial to understand the Polish stance on CFSP. Only unity in its action will allow the EU to keep a real impact on the shape of international relations. The weight of challenges that we face requires a firm and coherent reaction. In tune with the principle unity makes strength. We are against impairing the EU's common voice and promoting the particular national interests by the respective countries. Another point, and this is why actually Poland is advocating for a strong common foreign and security policy, the CFSP. We regard the CFSP as a crucial prerequisite for the EU to regain or come to the world stage, if you wish. We need to fully take advantage of the opportunities that the Treaty of Lisbon offers. We haven't done yet. And as far as strengthening of the foreign policy is concerned, what we really need is, first of all, to univocally identify the challenges we're facing and determine crucial common interests that we should pursue. So priorities, interests. And I think one of the main problems we're facing in Europe, we are not brave enough, keen enough to define our interests clearly and draw the conclusions out of what we define for many purposes, being it the political correctness or other issues. But without having a clear list of priorities, we won't manage. And the priorities from the Polish perspective are very, very clear. First of all, it should be a clear new security and foreign policy strategy. We hoped that one of the results of this today's very European Council would be a clear definition of a CFSP strategy, or at least it's the start of a discussion on that. Another point, a second point from Warsaw perspective, would be a far-reaching reform of the European neighbourhood policy, and I will dwell on that in a moment. The third point from our perspective is a uniform approach towards our main partners. Starting, I said already, China, but also Russia. From the Polish perspective, Russia obviously is a very important actor. And the advancement of projects we already have with the neighborhood. I mean, in the east it would be the Eastern Partnership. In the south there are many projects which worth reviving. Let's have another look at the Union for the Mediterranean and other instruments for cooperation with the South. And another point, the fifth point, the reinforcing of common security and defense policy. Poland is very much concerned about the, let's say, security discussion in the European Union, not only soft but also hard security, and we think that the CSDP is also an important subject for further discussions. And another point from Warsaw, my last one, would be the intensified strategic partnership with the United States. We think there is still further potential to be boosted in the transatlantic partnership, and we have to revive it. This transatlantic bond has to be a vital one if we want to succeed on the international level. Now, a few comments from the very Polish perspective on the situation in the East. As you know, Russia's aggression in Ukraine has led to a breakdown in the existing EU-Russia relations, which were based on the readiness, in particular on the side of the European Union, to build a strategic partnership and rapprochement. We wanted to support the modernization processes in Russia. We wanted to support a transformation there. We seemed not to have succeeded on that. This is why we need to fundamentally reformulate our policy to Russia, and one of the key elements of our policy should be to reduce to draw conclusions from what happened in Ukraine, and first of all reduce our dependence on Russian energy resources, including in the framework of the Energy Union project. Keeping the EU member states and the Euro-Atlantic community united in face of Russia's actions of the aggression in the East, and also on sanctions, remain as our priority. We actually think that what the EU managed to do during the Russian-Ukrainian crisis is quite a success. we managed to speak with one voice. Even if this was not always the most ambitious voice, we managed to stick to the unity principle, and this is very valid, and we think it's a clear value, and the CFSP may profit from that on a long term. And another point from Warsaw, we're going to continue our engagement in adjusting the Eastern Partnership policy to the new geopolitical situation. Despite a difficult context in the East, the Eastern Partnership Summit in Riga in May 2015 was a signal of EU support for democratic transformation in the Eastern Europe and of its will to tighten the cooperation with our Eastern neighbors. We strive for EU's additional support for the reform of our partners implementing the CFTAs, the association agreements, and conducting reforms according to the principle more for more. And Poland is going also to defend our neighbors' right to sovereignly determine their paths of development. This is also a very important statement for me. And the new geopolitical determinants enforce a redefinition of a policy on EU's neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland has from the very beginning actively participated in the process of reforming the European neighborhood policy by means of, among others, joint initiative with our partners, with France and Germany, but also by other regional initiatives. The result of an ongoing review should be a fundamental redefinition of the ENP so that it becomes a more effective and realistic policy and enables the EU to cope with new challenges in its neighborhood area, political Islam, terrorism in the south, attempts to stop democratic transformation processes, the aspiration on the side in particular of Russia to rebuild the Soviet space in the east, a post-Soviet space in the east. What is needed is a more ambitious offer for our neighbors that are most involved in implementing reforms, but also finding a cooperation formula for partners that are not interested in an association with EU. So we need to find a balanced approach, tailor-made solutions for individual partners. In the south, a different approach is needed to Libya and a different to Tunisia. We need to settle an agreement with those who want to cooperate closely with us, and we need to find answers taking into account the level of ambition on the side of our partners, both in the south and in the east. We advocate on an ambitious common security and defense policy. I dwelt on that already. We really hope on a strategic discussion on a desired CSDP shape, including enhancing EU's ability to efficiently react to crises in our neighborhood and tightening the relationship and the cooperation with NATO. We have presented detailed proposals regarding further development of the CSDP in a joint letter of the Weimar Triangle, meaning France, Germany, and Poland, a joint letter of the Ministers for Foreign Affairs and for Defense, directed to the High Representative Federica Mogherini. And we hope to find, let's say, enough flesh in the conclusions of today's European Council as regards the CSDP. And concentrated on our direct neighborhood, we cannot forget about the global dimension of the CFSP, the transatlantic alliance. I mentioned that already. We think it's a unique example of a global success. Its significance is visible once again in the face of the global turmoils wherever they happen, be it the Middle East, be it Libya, be it Syria, be it Ukraine. Our main challenge here is facing terrorist threats. Here the transatlantic partnership is needed, and apart from the security issues, we should also continue our effort to strengthen economic relations with Washington. And here the famous TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, comes to my mind. It will be essential for strengthening the EU's position as a global player and for the revival of the transatlantic bond. I tend to say that this very agreement though criticized from many angles, actually boils down to a very, let's say, political perspective, and not necessarily to only the economic one. It goes far beyond the very economic sense of the cooperation. An assessment of the global security conducted by High Representative Mogherini will entail strictly global elements. Nonetheless, they should not obscure the main challenges and threats that the EU is facing, and whose roots are situated in the first place in the EU's direct neighborhood, in both contexts, in the East and in the South. And the Polish reference, and this will be my last remark, and the Polish reference point in the debate about EU's global position are hard security issues in the neighborhood, both in the South and in the East. And we think we need a factual and honest analysis of the situation in both neighborhoods of the EU, which should provide a basis for reformulating current policies and be a starting point for working out of a new EU strategy and foreign policy strategy, with a security and foreign policy strategy, which would equip us for coping with the new challenges we facing. So basically, my remarks boil down to the very call for unity, coherence, and more synergy in Europe's action, and a single voice in the foreign policy agenda. Thank you very much.
Will you take some questions? Thank you, Madam Secretary. I mean, that was it was really refreshing to hear you.
I hope it wasn't too long.
No.
My
It's
original
perfect.
idea was to speak for 20 minutes, and I see it was a bit longer.
This is excellent. However, you have given us the opportunity now to perhaps raise a couple of questions. So I do invite anybody who would wish to ask a question or voice an opinion about this topic and about the issues which have been raised to do so. Perhaps to set the ball rolling, at one point you raised the issue of the issue of democracy. I mean,
I have it in my portfolio, so I'm using it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, at one point people were in love with the European project. They don't seem to be, this love affair seems to have, we've been overtaken by pragmatism, by realism, by sort of a revival of certain nationalistic
It's
sentiments.
an old marriage, isn't it? When
Yes.
The fascination phase is over.
I mean, what can we do to I mean, we try even locally. I mean, one of our job as one of our remits as MEUSAC is to try and engage people in the. I mean, luckily Malta is a country where, although we had a very, we have the debate before we voted to join the European Union was very much split evenly between the no and the yes camp. But once the yes prevailed and we did join the European Union, so there is consensus. Basically, I mean, just to give you an example, when the Lisbon Treaty was ratified by the Maltese Parliament, it was ratified unanimously. So I think I doubt if there's any other parliament in any other member state that managed to get the Lisbon Treaty have a unanimous support in Parliament. And public opinion is quite positive in terms of course, we have issues. As you may be aware, the migration issue raises certain concerns here. There are concerns which I'm sure you discussed yesterday with Minister Vell and with Parliament's Secretary Borg in terms of the future scenario in terms of taxation, for instance, which is I'm sure it's something when the Maltese government speaks with a certain voice, it is reflecting the concerns, I think, here, particularly of business and of the commercial sector regarding a possible harmonization in that respect in terms of direct taxation. So we have to be careful even here, because this love affair, which, we're still in 10 years, just like you, 11 years, is a bit of a honeymoon period for us. But how are we going to help people rekindle enthusiasm for the European project? Because ultimately, unless we go to the fundamentals, we're not going to succeed.
I should start by saying you're asking a career diplomat, so I have limited charisma. I would not be the one, standing in front of those voting, claiming that I have all the answers they require. But I think partially what's happening in the European Union, this rise of populism, this disappointment on the side of many, it's our own fault. And let me show you why. And I think it's simple. If you look at how we handle European policy, whenever a government is going to Brussels, when it comes back, each and every success is national. Each and every failure is European. It's not us, it's them. The European Union usually is, the one to blame. Yeah? If something is not working, it's the European Union. If something is functioning well, it's us. We've done it for you, we, the national government. And I think this is one of the problems. We do not try to be convincing in terms of showing what the EU really is about. This is my first point. My second point, we need a new narrative for Europe. People are simply bored with this peace and stability and prosperity logic. If you ask your children, people who are in their teens, they would tell, we always have peace. The Second World War, for them, it's as distant as the Middle Ages. So it's for them it's not working anymore. They take open borders for granted. They can't imagine that there was a period that the borders were not open, and I remember the times when in Poland you were not allowed to have your passport at home. You had to deposit it at a police station. I remember that. My 15-year-old children wouldn't remember. So it's really it's the difference. So we need to find a narrative about Europe which is convincing to them, which would show them what the EU is about and why this is necessary. So we probably need even more of this exchange programs between young people, academics, etc. But we should need to convincingly communicate about these very practical things the EU is doing. Everyone noticed that we have lower roaming prices. It might not be the sexiest of topics, but we owe the lower price to the European Union. If we manage to implement the the energy union properly, we will end up with lower energy prices. If you get a lower check for energy at the end of each month, you'll be happy, and one should know that this is due to the European Union. So maybe we should be modest and try to communicate the Union not on this very metaphysical level of peace and prosperity, but on this concrete small items, and be blunt enough to say that the Union is something which or a body which influences our daily lives, and therefore we should care about it. I must tell you, I'm very much concerned about what's happening in the European Parliament elections. The European Parliament was meant to be really, the representation of the European public opinion. And if you look at the election results and in each and every member state, and at the falling numbers of those who take part in the elections, I think this is really concern rising, because we should really all be interested in what's happening there. So these are also, I think, to some extent, lessons learned from what we've done wrong and where we should be better. We should also, I think, take the European citizens seriously. I often have the impression, being a civil servant, that we tend not to take the Europeans seriously. It's a logic of, we know better, we will inform you what to be done. I think in particular in times of the modern media, social networks, however you call them, Facebook, Twitter, Internet, in its various forms, we should use this modern media to communicate with the public opinion. I think these days one communicates with the use of these modern technologies, and not via this very, let's say, conservative instruments like sorry for saying so, serious article in the newspapers. And teens would not read them, young people would not read them, and even if they read, it's probably a 3% of them who reading it. They want to hear about what's happening in a serious manner, and they want to be taken seriously. And I think these are all the challenges we're facing. And in particular, I think after the crisis, a group to be addressed are young people, those who feel left behind and who are afraid that their living conditions may be for the first time since many years worse than the living conditions of their parents. And these are the challenges we are facing, and I think we should be better on communication in particular. Thank you.
So, any questions? Yeah, okay, we have two. Dr. Vassallo and Mr. Mifsud after that.
Thank you for your clear and challenging exposition this morning. Thank you. My name is Phil from the University of Malta. I think that the problem with young people is not whether Europe is going to have an international role or not, but the problem is providing them with rewarding career jobs. That's the first thing. Many of the strategic points of action that you have mentioned in your presentation imply a change, if not a redesign, of the multi-level governance concept. What is an international role, what is a national role, and what is a local role in governance. Do you think that the challenges you have mentioned can be dealt with the present treaty formation, or if we are talking about a redesign of how we govern ourselves, that would imply going back to the drawing board on the treaty formation of the European Union?
Shall we collect the questions?
Yes, yes, we could. Well, Mr. Mifsud?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for your very interesting and
Can you take the mic, please? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very enlightening. Now, I would like to take another subject, another side. Everyone, I think, give due importance to the European neighborhood policy. And as they currently being passed now, we are facing the Syrian crisis, and also from the North Africa, and they are tied to, unfortunately, also Islamic religion, so to say. But I note that the Arabs or the Islamists are not coordinating or making any effort to help fellow Islamists. In fact, we are suffering, so to say, because of this upheaval in Syria, especially also, including even Turkey, though it is not part of the European Union, but an aspirant. But we are suffering from this situation. But I note that there is such a lack of coercion by the European Union to tackle the source by the Arabs themselves. Why is it Europe not exerting any pressure on the Arab Union or African Union to coordinate a policy and stop this upheaval within their religious function?
Yes, Mr. Fenech.
Philip Fenech from the Chamber of Small and Medium Enterprises. I'd like to hear your take on the Greek situation at the moment. I know that all the countries obviously are trying to keep it together, but there are conditions, and you cannot break certain conditions because you create a precedence towards other countries. What in the eventuality, if Greece would be forced to leave the European Union, what do you feel would be the serious impact on the whole Union? We all know about the linkages that what Greeks input is in the total economy, and the European Union is doing a lot of effort, obviously, to create growth in all the countries. But this is of concern to us, especially coming from the entrepreneurial economic sector. Thank you very much for your very concise and intelligently put presentation.
Thank you very much. Many thanks for the compliments. It's really a pleasure for me to be here in Malta, and this is very important for me also to underline how important we see the further development of a Polish-Maltese dialogue. I heard within this, it's my second day here, and when I arrived, I heard from my Maltese colleagues that Poland and Malta, to a certain extent, are really very far, at least geographically, from each other in the European Union. But when we start speaking, you immediately notice we're actually very like-minded on so many issues from the European agenda that it's sometimes it's hardly believable, and it shows of a certain community of values, of understandings in the European Union, and I think we should work on that. And if I can tackle the business perspective, I would say there's also still potential to be boosted in the economic cooperation. So I encourage you to have a look on the business perspectives with Polish partners, and would encourage the Polish partners to do the same, vice versa. Let me try to answer your questions shortly. Treaty change. My personal perspective and the view of my country, no, not within a short-term perspective. Too dangerous. I think a lot can be done within the current treaty framework, in particular in the CFSP and CSDP area. If you look at the possibilities the treaty offers, we haven't even looked at many of those, taking into account, let's say, what is possible in terms of an enhanced cooperation, structural cooperation, etc. These are all areas which haven't been even tested, which haven't been subject to a serious discussion even. So I think there is a lot to be done, and also in terms of this multi-level governance, I think we can achieve a lot in the current treaty framework. I see a certain risk in this tendency in the European Union to say whenever there is a serious challenge, let's change the treaties. I think this is not the way forward. If we manage to have 200 years old constitutions and exploit them in a very modern manner, if you wish, I think we can do the same with our treaties, but we have to be innovative. Even look at the mobility context. This is for me a very important subject, because we're discussing it a lot with our British colleagues. Look at what the European Court of Justice is doing with that. There is a certain scope for individual actions, for filling the treaty with a certain life, and for putting flesh on the bones of the very treaty provisions. And I think we don't need to change the treaty each time when there is a problem. Quite on the contrary, we should really be innovative and try to act and use the current treaty framework as good as we can. On the ENP. You're closer to the southern Mediterranean than we are. So let me tell you how it looks from the Polish perspective. And I suppose you'll tell me that it's not very much different here in Malta. We tend to see the Arab world as a very homogeneous one. We call them the Arabs, and they're very different. They have different interests. The Arab world is very divided along many lines. You're better aware of these lines than I am. But definitely there is a challenge in the cooperation, and I agree on that. We should be more focused on, I call it a kind of horizontal cooperation between our partners on the southern shore of the Mediterranean, but also in the Middle East and the Arab countries further. We should somehow encourage them to work more closely with each other, because I agree that the rivalries in the Arab world are harmful for us, and Since I'm a diplomat, I won't go further in explaining where the trouble lies. Yes, I agree we could be better on that, and I very much look forward to the summit you will be holding here in Malta in November. I think there is a good chance in exactly, exploiting the potential of our cooperation and maybe exerting a certain level of pressure on our partners to be better in their cooperation, also on a let's say regional level. I once heard an expert, an analyst of the Arab world saying that we should be more convincing in bringing our partners to cooperate not only bilaterally with us, meaning individual state on the southern shore, European Union on the other side, but also create this kind of networks which would go far beyond this only institutional framework, but contain a certain substance in it. And I think that there is a point in this logic. Greece. I'll take a deep breath and I say, I don't even want to think about such scenarios. I think we have all an interest in keeping Greece in. Greece is a European member state for years. They mismanaged certain reform efforts, but they desire our support and they should go and get it. Obviously, and I come from this part of the world which was within the whole transition process, accession to the EU, to NATO, which was forced to undergo very serious, costly and socially painful reforms. So we understand how the Greeks feel. At the same time, we think, they are a partner. They should be assisted in finding a consensus, but they also have to deliver. So we should also be clear on let's say, on the very sense of the European project. We agree on certain regulations and on certain rules, and we should be blunt to say they apply to each and every member state. So we maybe should be really better in a kind of monitoring mechanism when it comes to macroeconomic situation reforms, etc. But the situation Greece is facing is very serious. I was in Athens 2 weeks ago, and you experienced the crisis there. And I think that one of the problems really the current government is facing is this very fatalism in the approach of the public opinion. They don't believe that they will get help, and they very much disappointed about what's happening, and they don't understand the situation they're facing. So I think we should show some patience here, and I really hope on the Eurozone member states that you will find an acceptable solution which would on one hand satisfy the creditors, and on the other help Greece to come out of the crisis. And I think there is always a light at the end of each and every tunnel. This tunnel might be in particularly long. But there is light, and let's help the Greek population to see it, to get to the light side. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, perhaps we'll take. Are there any more questions so that we have? I know the Madam Secretary would like to visit St. John's Cathedral.
The protocol at some point will come on knocking and saying
yes,
it's time to go.
Good. Okay. Well, are there any further questions so that we can? Okay, there's one question.
Thank you for the speech. I would like to ask you, do you think that a renewed European security strategy could be a good opportunity to start speaking as a single actor about foreign policy and security issues? For example, the situation of foreign fighters. And I think it's a very important issue nowadays.
Yes, I think so. I think, even if it will not immediately result with the Union speaking with one voice, it will help us to agree on the list of priorities and challenges we need to tackle. I think the most crucial problem we're facing are different notions in different member states on what is important for the Union, which direction we should go, and which challenges to tackle. Such a discussion about a new security strategy and the foreign policy agenda would serve the purpose of, let's say, limiting the scope of discussion and really force us to think about and discuss what are the crucial challenges in, let's say, in both neighborhoods, but also going beyond that. And I think this is for our both countries, I mean, you being at the very south of the European Union, us being at the very east, where the challenges now are really, I mean, we sense them. You sense the pressure from the south. We see the immediate results or immediate consequences, the dangers in the east. This would help us to find a compromise around which issues are to be tackled in the first place. And I think the answers are to some extent common. So they would also help us to bring more synergy into our action. And I think also understand that that we have that we very similarly see many trends in the global agenda and in the EU's global role. So I think this is an exercise. It may be too theoretical to some extent, but it will help the Union to let's say create a certain picture of where we stand in terms of the international developments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you once again. Well, you mentioned one thing, and I think we would all agree with that although we are far apart, there are many similarities, including, of course, our national colors. We both proudly fly the white and red, although you do so horizontally and we do so vertically, with our George Cross, of course, which sometimes is controversial because even locally, you know, some people would not like that there. But I guess that's our history. I know our history is made up of episodes, some of which we are proud of, some of which we are not so proud of. But ultimately, this is what the Europe is all about. I mean, it's about. Yes, I agree we need a new narrative, although, of course, the old narrative is as relevant today as it was when Schuman and the founding fathers set about creating the European Union.
But it's a bit more abstract than it was.
It is. And no, I agree with you. I mean, today, it's all about society and the way society is today, that we have to be relevant and to convince people, to make people enthusiastic, we have to speak about how to make their lives better. And I do hope that people like you who are in positions of responsibility in terms of decision making, and people like us who are there to communicate what you decide, well, I hope we make our lives easier. And I'm sure that an event such as this does facilitate very much. So I'm really grateful to you once again, to the Ambassador, to Her Excellency, and to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and all those who made it possible to have this event today. It was indeed an honor for us, and we do hope that you have a nice rest of the day visiting St. John's. Of course, that is something, you know, absolutely marvelous, and I'm sure you'll be you know, it is something indeed that we are proud of, and it does say a lot about our heritage. So a nice rest of the day and a good trip back home, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you very much. I'm enjoying each and every minute of being here. Really. Thank you very much.